I just noticed that Casey Neistat does that too. Excuse me. That must be like an inherited tick of starting the video with me fidgeting with the camera. But I don't think it was self-conscious. Anyway, my engagement with YouTube was provoked. I've mentioned it before on this channel. Initiated in response to an online skeptic movement that I felt had moved in their opposition to the more reactionary elements within the social justice movement, which are, every political movement has fringes, and I usually don't agree with Trevor Noah on a lot of stuff. I think he's a little soft in terms of his politics. I felt the same way about Jon Stewart. America is so brutally right-wing, in my opinion, that the Daily Show, which is a very centrist, corporate news program, it is considered the voice of a strong left-wing commentator, which is strange to me when you consider what true left is in terms of rhetoric. But I'm not gonna go too far off the point. So Trevor Noah touched on that idea in terms of movements when he was talking to Tommy Loren in the now infamous interview where he challenged her on Black Lives Matter. He pointed out that the people in the crowd don't necessarily reflect the narrative of a movement. So you can run a camera into the Dakota Access protest movement and probably find 5 or 6 people that are reactionary and clownish and vulgar and extreme and beyond reason. If they were not perhaps borderline irrational, I think that passion cuts both ways. I think what brings people, what I've noticed, is that what brings the people that actually go to protest movements out is a sort of profound enthusiasm. So I don't necessarily find it disorienting that skeptics are. I don't find it offensive that skeptics are alienated by the activist left, because they're almost diametric opposites. A skeptic is, the moral mission of skepticism is to approach things with a measured temperance so that you can evaluate it and process it. Activism, whether it's left-leaning or right-leaning, including boycotts, protests, sit-ins, socially relevant activism is somewhat going to lean, it's going to skew and attract a reactionary temperance, a reactionary temperament, right? That's how it's going to, that's the spirit that's going to animate the movement. That's what sort of makes the street move, is that these movements are reactive. They're a reaction to circumstances. Black Lives Matters is a reaction to police violence. And mass incarceration, and the senselessness, the vulgar bias against black victims in the U.S. justice system. I don't think a reasonable person can stand by during, in the wake of the George Zimmerman debacle and the various miscarriages of justice, whether they be those that murder black civilians not being charged or getting off at trial or getting off at sentencing with a slap on the wrist. It should make you skeptical of the U.S. justice system that these almost daily occurrences of justice deferred for black victims should compel, in my opinion, some pretty robust skepticism about the external factors that are animating the movement. You should probably look at the reasons that the protesters are out there rather than focusing on the fury of the dispossessed. The person in the street was not brought out into the protest environment to be even-headed. They were compelled by injustice and outrage and indifference from a society with a post-apartheid division of personhood. You know, these Republicans always cite personhood in these anti-choice bills, and within the U.S. Constitution, the concept of black personhood at its inception was dubious and sinister in its reductive, dismissive language. That history casts a long shadow that concerns me in terms of the narrative regarding BLM in the skeptic community seemingly existing in a historical vacuum. In terms of current mitigating factors, but legacy disenfranchisement that brings out the protesters. The struggle inside of Black Lives Matters is a struggle that has pretty much been fought. It's a battle that's been fought for centuries now in the United States for black personhood. So the biggest concern I have with the skeptical narrative on YouTube of Black Lives Matters, especially, with the rise of the alt-right, is the idea that BLM is black nationalism, which it's not. There is no substantial evidence outside of anecdotal. I met a protester and he said black people rule. That's not. Or I met a protester that said Whitey is garbage. That's anecdotal. The moral mission of Black Lives Matters is not to put black lives above white lives. It's not even an analog to the classic Black Panthers, which were a black pride movement for a group of people who had endured mass indignity for generations. I'm not talking about the modern rambles of the offshoot rebranded Black Panthers. I'm talking about the legitimate communist Black Panthers movement in the United States between the early 60s, late 80s. Was the window, more or less. When Huey P. Newton died, the classic Black Panther Party, just like sort of the Young Lords, was the Puerto Rican equivalent in the Bronx, the Puerto Rican Latino version of the Black Panthers. Was Young Lords. I cite Young Lords imagery a lot in my stuff because it was an important movement and was generally misunderstood as sort of an extremist ethno-nationalist movement. So what's the difference between Black pride, Latino pride, and white pride? Within the white nationalist movement, which is composed of mostly the Klan and the neo-Nazi, and every one of the little iterations between them, there's minor distinction between the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazis in terms of one is a more American pride based white supremacy movement, which is the Klan, and the neo-Nazis are a far more international movement for Aryan solidarity. But I'm not going to split hair on Nazis, man. I'm going to drop them all in the same cup because they belong there, and Black Lives and Young Lords and Black Panthers, even the original Black Panthers, don't belong there because it is not supremacist for a historically disenfranchised, humiliated, and dehumanized group of people to it is a revolutionary act as a, whether it's Chicano or other groups of Latinx Americans who have been historically oppressed, to stand up and say, I am proud of who I am, because who I am has been held against me. Who I am specifically has been used as a means of dismissing my humanity, my part in the human family. White pride, white nationalism is not about a bunch of people whose race has been some form of Achilles heel to their progress and survival as a group. You can say that there are poor white people who have been historically disenfranchised, but their race is the only form of privilege they enjoy. The compact in the United States of America between wealthy white aristocrats and poor white, at one point it was farmers, and now you could just say it's the poor white rural community, stands. That coalition exists, and it is a coalition of social privilege. The reclamation that the American white supremacy movement is very concerned with is a reclamation. The Make America Great Again slogan was a reclamation of poor and middle-class white social privilege. It was a cry to Donald Trump's class. It was a promise from the white aristocracy to the disaffected white working class. We've got you. The forgotten man. I remember Trump used that talking point quite a bit after he was elected. I'm going to look out for the forgotten man. So they've been feeding these people this narrative of, we're going to return you to the mantle of American personhood. Everyone else is going to be underneath you, and we're going to achieve greatness. The fascism of the fascist idea of restoration of a people has always been alluring to these ethno-nationalists, these race supremacists in any country, particularly a country that has been ravaged by the brutal inequalities of international capitalism. Brexit, and Britain had a lot of support from the isolationists, but the narrative within the movement, although it was not explicit because they'll always dog whistle, is return to fundamental Britishness, white Britishness, fundamental race privilege. So, I like to give credit where credit is due, and a lot of the European skeptics have started to push back against the alt-right. But my concern with some of the pushback is, well, you guys are SJWs. BLM is also ethno-nationalist. That's just not accurate. You can disagree with the movement. You can disagree about the prevalence of police brutality. You can disagree, even though I don't, you can disagree with the statistics about police shootings. You can disagree with various judgments about whether or not people were going to be charged or prosecuted or got adequate sentencing for the altercations, like the Mike Brown shooting or whatever, right down to Tamir Rice, and you can disagree on that. Even though it seems to me quite apparent what's going on, you can disagree with the movement on that, I think, and still be reasonable and still have processed the facts. My concern is that the narrative of BLM as a KKK equivalent, the narrative of BLM as a black supremacy movement comparable to this alt-right Nazi movement online is to me something that is best left to the reactionary right. When Sean Hannity on Fox says that kind of shit, I'm not disappointed in Sean Hannity because he's got a narrative to sell. But when a group of people who are supposed to, I'm part of the activist left. I organize within a labor union, and I hit the street. And I'm driven by passion, and sometimes I'm less critical than I need to be, but I need other people on the left to honestly look at these movements. I need the skeptics. We need each other. We're both within the left. We need to balance each other. But it's not going to help if you and the right wing have the same opinion and talking points without a critical eye. The right wing, when they say that stuff about BLM, the Tommy Loren dum-dums, I'm not shocked, and I'm not disappointed, because they don't process jack shit. They hear something that makes sense to them. BLM, KKK. It's 3 letters. And it's blacks. And it's whites. It's about race. Black lives are about the implications of race within a society. It is not about the exaltation of the black race at the expense of other races, even though the All Lives Matters crowd will say that that's not them either. But the evidence is against them. And my concern is that the evidence is really against the idea of BLM as a ethno-nationalist race superiority culture. Beyond anecdotal evidence, beyond, one person out of a crowd of 10,000 people saying something off color, I think the evidence is in favor of BLM.